Thanks, Glenn. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jimmy. I am an alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And it's always been customary where I come from to let you know that I got a home group. It's called the Design for Living Group on the Jersey Shore. I have a sponsor. I have a service sponsor. I sponsor a lot of guys, but most importantly, I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was on March 28, 1987. So extremely grateful for this way of life, extremely grateful to be here. Thank you, Glenn, for the invitation. Good to see everyone. And that daily reflections reading is so appropriate. Glenn asked me a little bit earlier, how's everything? And I'm like, oh, it's all right. I mean, life's not great, right? It's been the spring of and summer so far of 2023 has been quite a doozy. About 2 months ago, I had unexpected major dental surgery, followed by I contracted an autoimmune disease, which is still not known. But what it has caused is vitiligo. And I don't know if you're familiar with vitiligo. It's where you lose all the pigmentation. And I don't know if you can see my head, but my whole scalp is no color to it no more. Now, that might come back. It could come back. Who knows? So dealing with that. And then 4 weeks ago, I had major shoulder surgery. I just got out of my sling this morning at therapy. I mean, and on this Friday, in a couple of days, my wife will be going under major surgery in New York City. Bill writes in the 12 and 12, when we approach step 10, we commence to put our AA way of living to practice. Practical use day by day, in foul weather and fair weather. Then comes the acid test. Can we stay sober, keep an emotional balance, and live to good purpose under all conditions? And I'm here to tell you, yes, you can. In the midst of a storm, in the midst of heavy artillery, you can stay sober and be still of purpose and still of use and still be emotionally okay. And you'll get that guy or you'll get that girl that'll come up to you and say, well, if you just read page 417, click your heels, acceptance, understand that nothing happens in God's world by mistake, and you'll be good. I mean, in a sense, yeah, that's right. Yeah, acceptance is the key to it. But we all come to acceptance in different ways. Some of us come happily. My case is more begrudgingly, right? I mean, acceptance is the fact that we all go through things, and I'm going through this with my wife, and again, that doesn't make me exempt, or this doesn't exempt the human emotion when we're dealing with stuff. Yeah, acceptance. I could still have anger. I could still have fear. I could still have, self-pity. But what that's reading that Bill's really saying is that in the midst of a storm, I could stay emotionally sober. I could stay emotionally mature. I could stay emotionally balanced in my life. And who knew that would happen? Who knew that can happen? For a guy like me, I've always run for my problems. I've always run. I've been a runner like probably many of us. When it gets hot, I got to go. And so I could stay in the midst of this thing that we're going through, this little storm, and be okay. But you see, there's a real contingency here, and the contingency is that I have to get unhooked from the thinking mind, the mind that's creating the stories, the mind that's painting a picture. Working with a bunch of guys, we're doing these spiritual exercises, and the difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is fear. We all have fear, but the thing that really gets us is the anxiety, right? And that's the story. That's the mind that just creates a story. So I just put that out there right now, just because I've heard it 1,000,001 times, is that my alcoholism doesn't come in a bottle; it comes in my mind. And my mind will create all sorts of different delusions about a lot of different things, right? And one of the first delusions I ever really understood, or maybe accepted, or maybe really saw for the first time, is nothing's my fault. And I know there's no one on here that has ever blamed anyone else for the way they feel or what's going on in your life, but maybe I'm just that unique that nothing has been my fault. And I could bring you all the way to the day I was born, because I was born perfect, and I was quickly handed over to these two character defects called mom and dad. And I used to blame my parents for everything, because who else am I going to blame, right? Eventually it became the first girlfriend, eventually it became your buddies, eventually it became the boss, so the list is from here to Glenn's house in Tennessee. of all the things and all the people that I blamed for everything, right? And this victim of this delusion, it's, you know, I look back, you know, I'm 65 years old. I look back at, you know, all my parents ever tried to do for me is to give me morals, give me values, you know, give me a good education. And in spite of what they did in their own way, you know, what happened to me is I introduced my parents to a way of life that they never even knew existed, you know, and I grew up in northern New Jersey. I grew up on the Jersey side of the Hudson River, right across from New York City. I grew up, you know, in the 60s. I grew up in a neighborhood where the only requirement for membership in the neighborhood was 5 or more kids. It seemed like that was the only place. I didn't even think there was any other place than my neighborhood. I grew up in a very blue collar, very union type of neighborhood. All the men are workers, all the women stay home to take care of all these kids. Everyone's a cop, everyone's a fireman, everyone's a union worker, you know, and you know, it was a great place to grow up. You know, my parents, and for some of you that are a little bit older, you might remember my parents opened up the door. My mom opened up the door at 8 o'clock in the morning and says, "Get out," and you know, you hung out on the streets till it was time to come home. And you know, your parents knew you would get fed somewhere. I mean, you know, but the problem with that is, you know, you become a product of the street, right? And over a course of period of time, you know, I want to be like a little wise guy, like with all the other guys, the older guys I see in the neighborhood. You know, eventually my dad and my brothers, they're not my idols anymore. My idols in my life, you know, is the neighborhood bookie. You know, he has a nice car. He always has a beautiful woman on his arm. He has a wad of money all the time. Those are the kind of people I inspire to be, you know. And you know, with all these kids and with all these things that are going on in the neighborhood, you know, there's always a birthday party, there's always a christening, there's always a graduation, there's always something going on. And at every event is one thing. It's King Alcohol. And you know, from an early late age, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, you know, the disease of perception I suffer from. I'm looking at alcohol and the way men and women drink. To me, it looks like this is going to be a lot of fun. This looks like freedom. This looks like, you know, there's no problems in life. It just seems like everyone's wearing life like a loose garment. That you know, this idea of, you know, just drinking and camaraderie and friendships and all, you know, it looks like something I can't wait to do when I get old enough to do. And I don't know what old enough to do means. I just know that there'll be a time. Now, I'm growing up in this house, and I'm growing up with this guy called Dad, who's cunning, baffling, and powerful. My father came from that generation where, you know, there was no emotion shown. There was no, you know, there was no hugs. There was no, fireside chats about the birds and the bees. My dad was a very tough man. He was a Korean War vet. He was, you know, like I said, from that generation, hard work, you know, a provider, but not really, you know, someone that you would, you know, cozy up to, you know. And but what I would witness as a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old is the ease and comfort that comes at once by taking that first drink. And excuse me, it just seems like every lawn guy just showed up in my neighborhood to cut the lawn. So if you hear a lot of lawnmowers, excuse me for that. But my dad, you know, he comes home every day and he's pissed off about something. I swear he probably suffered from some sort of PTSD, but they never, you know, diagnosed it back then in those days. You know, so my dad would come in the house, he's huffing and puffing. He was a butcher. He always had blood on him. You know, he was, you know, wore those white aprons. And, you know, I used to joke sometimes, you know, did my dad, you know, slaughter a cow today? Or did he grab somebody out at a red light and just start beating the guy up? I mean, that's the kind of guy he was, you know. You just never knew. He's very unpredictable. But my dad would walk in every night, 5 o'clock, like clockwork, and my mom would make these two pitchers, one called martinis, the other one called Manhattans. And what I would witness at a young age is the ease and comfort that comes at once by taking that drink, because my dad would take that drink, and like many of us on this call right now, he became a different person after that first drink. He became the guy that wanted to have a catch in the backyard. He became a guy that had a sense of humor. He became the guy that, you know, there was something different about him, almost a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality was going on. He just became different. But don't let me fool you. There were those days, and those days looked like this. My dad would come in the house, huffing and puffing about something. He'd take that first drink, and then all of a sudden, the kitchen plates would be flying across the kitchen. The kitchen chairs would be flying across the kitchen. If he grabbed one of us young kids, we'd be flying across the kitchen. So we would just lay in our beds, me and my two brothers and my two sisters. We'd get under the covers, and we would just wait for the storm to pass, because we never knew what was going to happen in my house. It was so unpredictable, right? Now, that doesn't make me alcoholic, but it makes me a kid that grows up with a lot of fear inside of me. The fear of my father, the fear of rage, the fear of anger, the fear of loud noises, the fear, the evil and corroding thread. Not only that, I'm a guy that grows up with a lot of insecurity about myself. Like I said, if we don't have those fireside chats, there's no self-esteem or esteemable things that we talk about, the ways you can feel good about yourself. So, I just feel like crap all the time. I don't know why. It's just the way I'm built, I guess. But most importantly, what I'm walking around with is something that was going to kill me, and that's secrets. You see, I come from a family, I come from a neighborhood where nothing leaves your house, nothing leaves your neighborhood. So from a young age, I'm internalizing emotions that I don't even know how to handle. I'm internalizing anger, I'm internalizing fear, I'm internalizing these secrets, I'm internalizing insecurities. And I don't know any of this stuff until I land with you guys. I'm just pushing it down, and waiting for the explosion to happen. And that explosion happened 53 years ago. I don't even know how old I am, 52 years ago, as a 13-year-old kid. Now, I truly believe every one of us have a moment. It could be a big moment, could be a little moment. I think mine's kind of a little moment, but when things just change the course of our life. And for me, it was being in fifth grade. My parents really wanted the best for me, but I could never see that. It's always, I took everything personal. Uh, and so they took me away from all the people I felt comfortable with, all my friends in the public school system. And they put me into the Catholic school system where I knew nobody. And all of a sudden I was dealing with priests and Catholicism and these things called nuns. And back in those days, they liked to grapple a little bit. They liked to fight. They weren't so pleasant, these people. So again, I'm walking into this thing, but, I'm going into sixth grade. I'm 13 years old. And this is when my life just takes that sharp turn to the left. I'm in a cemetery one day, and I'm with five guys that I still know to this day. And here comes that first bottle. It's Colt 45 malt liquor. And I stretched my hand out and grabbed that bottle with a lot of fear, because I didn't know what was going to happen if I started to drink. That perception of fun and freedom and all that kind of went out the window. So I put my hand in there and I start drinking on that Colt 45 malt liquor. Next bottle that comes around is Mohawk Blackberry Brandy, and I start drinking on that Blackberry Brandy. What I could tell you about my first night drinking is I puked purple for about 2 weeks. I took a beating from my father. My mother grounded me for life, but the hook was in. That magic elixir worked for a guy like me on that night, because what happened to me, like probably everyone on this call right now, is that thing that was going on inside of me, that thing that I did not understand, those unmanageable, spiritual disconnected, that fear of everything just kind of like, settled down. It just settled down, and everything just seemed to be okay, right? And now I know, looking back 52 years ago, I'm alcoholic right out of the gate. And why do I tell you that with such assurance? Because I know what I suffer from today. I know the physical allergy. I know about the phenomena called craving. I knew on day one I couldn't control the amount once I started to drink. I knew that second leg of the puzzle was put into place that night. That thing called the obsession, where the idea is so strong it overcomes all other ideas. I couldn't wait till next weekend. I couldn't wait to be with my friends and go to the football game, go to the dance, get some booze, do whatever we're going to do and have some fun, to recreate that first night. Even though that first night had consequences that weren't too good, I couldn't wait to just fill that hole in my soul again and fill that void. And little do I know, I'm stepping right on the path that goes straight to pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, otherwise known as AKA hell. And over the next 16 years of my life, the progression of my alcoholism, the progression of my drinking was coupled with the progression of my behavior. And living out on the streets and doing the things I was doing, I was getting in a lot of trouble. I was stealing a lot. It's not like my parents ever sat me down and said, "Hey, Jim, this is, how you rob a car," or "Jim, how you rob an apartment," or do illegal activities. We used to rob the trains back in the days and, sell that stuff out of our trunks. I mean, there was a lot of criminal behavior, and, not that I'm making that not that I'm, looking at that in a minimal way. It was important, and I paid the price for that kind of behavior. But the thing was, it was just about the camaraderie of the guys, and being with the guys and drinking and thinking that this is a great deal. My parents put me into a prep school, a high school, and I tell this story for two reasons. Well, first is, this is where I'm introduced to the morning drink. I was a basketball player who I got hammered the night before a really big game, and And I remember being on that bus the next day, and I was with a guy who happens to be in AA himself today. And, he pulls out a bottle out of his gym bag and he says, how you know how you feel better and stop those shakes? And I said, what's that? He goes, just start drinking again. And so on the bus going to a basketball game, I saw drinking with this guy. And, that just became normal, common practice, right? If you have the shakes, the old term, drink the hair of the dog. I started to understand that at the age of 16, 17 years old, that if you want to feel better, just start drinking again. Another incident I had in school was, anyone of authority, I always looked askance at, right? That's a nice fancy word. I always looked at like a problem, right? Because of my old man, anyone of authority just pissed me off, and I just didn't know how to deal with people that had that, upper hand. And whether it was a coach yelling at me, at a basketball practice or football practice or a priest, I tell this story, a priest confronted me once and, after a few words, I wound up grabbing this priest and I knocked him out, right? And again, people laugh sometimes and people all I can tell you is I didn't go to hell right away, okay? And why I tell that story is because it's very important. That's where I planted the stake. That's where I earmarked the time that I became my father. And from the day of that punch to the day I landed it, and maybe even a couple of years into recovery, I became my old man. I either got angry at it or I drank at it. And every situation, every person, every confrontation, every circumstance of my life, I either got pissed off, angry, rageful, or I just said, screw you, and I just drank, right? And just tried to get rid of your existence, my life. And that just was a pattern along with all these other character defects, which I don't know what they are. I think this is the way we all are, right? The way I'm growing, the way I'm feeling, all these emotions, all this stuff that's coming out of me. And see, there's not enough booze in the world to get past that stuff. So I'm just a chronic alcoholic who's drinking around the clock. But here's the delusion again. I don't think alcohol's a problem. You're a problem. That's a problem. Everything else is a problem, but it's not me, right? And what happened is I wound up getting out of school, a little caveat. My mom was the secretary to the principal in that high school. That's the only reason why I got away with what I got away with, and off to college I go. I like to say the greatest 10 years of my life, but the truth of the matter is I lasted in university in Pennsylvania for 1 year. And I came back to New Jersey, and what's a guy to do? I got no education, I got no trade, and all I do and all I know is that, there's a bar on every corner where I grow up. So I go down to the corner bar, and that seems to be like headquarters for everyone, right? The mailman's there, the cops are in there, the firemen are in there, teachers are in there. Everyone's in there before their job, before their occupation, and we're all lying at each other, and we're talking about all the dreams and aspirations and goals we have, right? But the fact of the matter is, I'm an 18-year-old kid and a 19-year-old kid sitting in a bar, and I'm doing something that I don't understand until I land in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. The thing that's tripping me up every time. I can give you a bunch of circumstances. I could tell you a lot of stories, but what I don't understand is I take that first drink on a daily basis. And when I take that first drink, all bets are off. And see, that's a really stupid thing when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. What do you mean the first drink gets me loaded? Yeah, it's the last 20. We hear this a million times. It's the last 20 or it's the outside issues. I have no concept of that first drink. That's really the thing that's lighting the fuse and getting me going. So I just sit in a bar all day and I'm just drinking, I'm drinking. I really don't leave until closing and then off to the after hours. And I mean, it's a miserable existence, like you all know. I mean, it's like alcohol has me in its grip and I don't know what to do. And I got odd jobs here, odd jobs there. I usually blow up and make mistakes and get fired for everything I'm doing because of my drinking. The way I do relationships, ladies, is, I'm in a bar one day and I see a pretty girl against the wall and I see my sister in a bar and I say, I'll buy you an illegal substance if you introduce me to that girl. And the reason why I do that, because I started to live the life of a double-edged sword. You see, there's half of me that's blaming everyone for what's going on in my life and blaming everyone for the way I feel, blaming everyone for my lack of funds, blaming everyone. But you see, there's another half of me, the other side of me. And the other side is the guy that's always searching something out there to fix the hole in my soul right here. I think booze is going to fill it. I think alcohol and drugs and women and money and cars, you name it, anything of a materialistic value is going to make me feel better about who I am. And maybe just change the course of my life. But the truth of the matter is, I continue to take that first drink. So I'm under the delusion that if I just get married, settle down, like a lot of guys I know are settling down. I'm 25 years old at the time. Get settled down, meet a woman, get the white picket fence, maybe get a real job. I think, I believe, I truly believe to my core that that's going to, be the answer to my problems. And I get married to this woman, and 4 months into the marriage, I walk out of the marriage because what I didn't understand is I had the inability not to drink. I'm powerless, but I don't understand powerlessness until I land with you guys. I don't understand that. Every time I take that first drink, I can't stop. I don't understand anything about the physical allergy. I don't understand any of that stuff. And I'm baffled by this thing that's going on. But again, being who I am, it's everything else that's causing the problems in my life. And what happens to me is I'm 4 months sober, and I take off and I go down to Boca Raton. I run out of the marriage, because that's what most good cowards do. They run. I walk out of the marriage and I go down to Boca Raton, Florida, where I have friends, and some of them have some well-off families, and I'm in this condo. I'll never forget it. I'm on the beach. I'm looking out the glass windows. I could see the beach. I could see the boats, the bikinis. I mean, it seems like everything a man would want, right? But I'm getting that knock. The knock of the four horsemen every day. You see, I'm being so driven by my shame and my guilt and my remorse of the way I'm showing up in people's lives and the things that have occurred in my life and the people I'm harming in my life. That shame and guilt and remorse. Most alcoholics have shame-based identities. We know that, right? But I'm just being driven by this. And then, like I said, the knock at the door, the four horsemen of terror or frustration, bewilderment, despair, it's there every day. But I'm under that delusion that all I need to do is crack open a bottle of Johnny Walker Red. And see, I'm at this point in my drinking where I don't even need to take the first drink. I just know cracking that seal, I can feel the grandiosity come back. But I take that first drink, and then that little kid comes out again. That little kid that was born perfect, and all of a sudden it's her fault. It's my parents' fault. It's Glenn's fault. It's whoever's fault it is, because I don't know how to take stock honestly, right? This is the difficulty when we land in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and we're asked to inventory our lives. I don't know how to inventory my life. I could write a life story where I'm just blaming everyone. I don't know how to look at my part or my mistakes in that stuff, right? So this is what's going on for a while. And, I eventually come back to New Jersey, and what do? I don't have a job. I have no trade. I have no hook to get into a union. And I make a decision. And, the decision was, I was so filled with shame of what I was doing and the way I was living, is that I decided to live on the streets. And for the next 19 months of my life, I lived homeless on the streets of New Jersey, or northern New Jersey, and lower Manhattan. And I lived that life, pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. It was dehumanizing. It was traumatic. I always say, if I had a glass, a glass basketball or soccer ball, let's just say, and I just dropped it, it would shatter. That was my life. And I couldn't see it. I could not see it. That's how strong this disease of alcoholism was. I couldn't see that drinking was a problem. And, and I walk in the streets, panhandling, stealing, selling blood back then. I mean, doing whatever I needed to do to get the next drink. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I walked in a bar one day. I was 29 years old at this point, and I walked in a bar, and I met this old guy, and he looked at me and said, "Hey, Jimmy, they're hiring guys like you in Newark Airport." Guys like me. Finally being seen for my potential here. Guys like me. And there used to be an airline called People's Express, and People's Express used to hire guys like us. Now, you have to be old to remember that airline, but People's Express hired guys like us. And the job was to get the luggage that was over there, hopefully on the plane that was over there. I mean, it was a real challenge, right? I always like to segue here. If you flew through Newark Airport in the 80s and you're still waiting for your luggage, well, I can make amends after this talk. But that was the job, right? And so you could just imagine, Newark Airport, people everywhere. We're going into this room. It's like a half-ass interview. Guy says, "Just go back out." I mean, I'm off the streets. I mean, I didn't even expect to get hired. I'm off the streets. And I remember sitting in a chair, and, for years, I couldn't tell you. If you asked me, "Jimmy, what were you feeling in that moment?" I couldn't tell you. I just utter defeat. I guess that's the answer, right? It wasn't until I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and opened the big book to page 8, read Bill's story, where Bill put words to his first step experience, which I really believe puts words to all our first step experiences. And when he says, "No words could tell the loneliness, despair I felt in a bitter morass of self-pity," Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And for the first time at the age of 29 years old, as I sat there with the wind blowing through my soul, maybe, just maybe, drinking's a problem. And after a few minutes, a complete stranger sat next to me. And after a few minutes, this gentleman looked at me and said, "What's your problem?" And for whatever reason, well, I know the reason today, only God's grace, I spit my life story up on this complete stranger. And he looked at me and he said, "I have the answer for you." I said, "What's that?" Pre-cell phone, pre-beeper days, he pulled out a piece of paper, wrote down a street. "You know where this is?" I said, "That's my old neighborhood." Put a number in front of that street, and he asked me a very strange question. He goes, "Is it possible for you not to take a drink today?" And I was honest with the guy. I said, "Yeah, I want to drink right now. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. Don't drink today and try to be in front of this address at 7 o'clock tonight." And all I could tell you, and there's no other answer for it, but for the grace of God, at 7 o'clock that night, with my knees knocking, my stomach churning, my head going 1,001 miles an hour, of all sorts of delusion. Was I even in the airport today? I wasn't even sure. I was so shot out. Standing in front of that house, a 1979 Chevy Impala pulled up. And it was the stranger driving that car. And in that car was a bunch of other strangers. And they pulled up on me and they rolled down the window and they said, "The most spiritual thing you'll ever hear in Alcoholics Anonymous, get in the car." And I got in the car with these gentlemen and they took me around the corner. It's less than 500 yards. I could have walked to this meeting, but they walked me into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, my grammar school, where I had all sorts of contempt towards God, towards goodness, towards you name it, anything that had any kind of reeked of any kind of happy goodness, anything fluffy, I mean, anything like that. I had contempt towards. Walking into grace doesn't always feel like walking into grace. Felt like I was walking out of chaos that night. I didn't understand the enormity of what I was about to walk into. I didn't understand the enormity of how my life was going to shift on that day. Because when I walked into that meeting, it was March 28, 1987. I haven't had a drink since that, the day before. And when I walked in that meeting, this grammar school, I was having flashbacks. I remember walking down those stairs and walking past the cafeteria, and I remember being a sixth grader, a seventh grader, eighth grader. I remember having those goals, those dreams, those aspirations. But I also remember taking that first drink. As I got down to the end of the hall, I smelled coffee. And I'm always generous when I say coffee because some of you old guys will remember this. They used to make this thing called Sanka. Sanka was like something the astronauts used to drink, but it was Sanka. And, and then I met the most important person you'll ever meet in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We call him the greeter. And this gentleman extended his hand to me, and I grabbed that flimsy reader, and he pulled me into you. And all of a sudden, my world opened up to something I never even knew existed. And all of a sudden, the kindness of strangers took over. I walked into AA when there was a time where we didn't talk about the big book. A lot of speaker meetings, a lot of, 12 and 12, a lot of discussion meetings. No real workshops like we see today and big book study meetings. And none of that was going on. It wasn't really until Joe and Charlie came through the Northeast. I guess it was like the, early 90s when things started to, everyone became militant and crazy and, started to hit people over the head with the big book. We all go through that phase a little bit. But things started to, that night, something happened. That stranger became my sponsor. That group became my home group, the Jersey City Young People. I was 29 years old. I think I was the youngest guy in the group. That just shows you how things have changed. But more importantly, when I walked in that room that night, those men and that greeter and the women gave me something back that night that I think we owe to every newcomer that walks into a meeting, or anyone that really walks into a meeting. They gave me a piece of dignity. They didn't care what I looked like. They didn't care what I smelled like. They didn't care that every other word was a profanity. They said, "Keep coming back, kid." And I did. And the kindness of the strangers, those men that took me under their wing. I always like to joke they didn't know the difference between a phone book and a big book. But I'll tell you, if you needed something, they'd be on your front porch in a heartbeat. Those gentlemen put me up in a motel for a week. They went out to a department store. They bought me clothes. They took care of me. They took me under their wing. And on day two, I woke up at this motel. They came to get me. And I learned what a trusted servant is that day. Because this guy, Richie, who became my sponsor, I told him the truth. I said, I'm scared. Now, why is that such a big deal? Because real men like me, real strong street guys like me, we don't share emotions. We internalize everything. And to say you're scared, that you have fear to another man, that's unheard of in my world. But I said, Richie, I'm scared. I want to drink. He goes, I know you do. And what this trusted servant did that day was called up his wife and said, take me off the calendar. I'm going to be with a newcomer for 3 days, for the day. And he took me to 3 meetings. He fed me 3 times. I must have drank 700 cups of coffee that day. But I felt like I was a part of something at last. I felt like, though I didn't understand what your language was or the AA lingo, or I just knew there was some sort of feeling of safety when I sat in a metal chair, held a cup of coffee, and listened to you guys tell your stories. There was something safe in that, right? Day 7, I'll never forget it. Like that first week, I could remember like it happened yesterday. Day 7, I'm my new home group, my new friends, my new sponsor. Still don't know what the hell's going on. And I'm at a business meeting. This guy, Richie's all excited. He runs up to me and goes, I want you to take the job as the ashtray cleaner. Ashtray cleaner? You're out of your mind. I didn't say that, but that's what I said in my head. You're out of your mind now. Why do I have to clean ashtrays? And I had a valid reason for that. Is because, believe it or not, I put every possible substance that has been in my body, but I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. So why do I have to clean ashtrays? I didn't get it, right? And what I didn't get was these men were trying to build a responsibility, a commitment to something, a commitment to my sobriety. And what I could tell you is from that day, day 7, to this moment, I've been tethered to Alcoholics Anonymous through a commitment. Whether it's been my home group, whether it's been the district, whether it's been the area, I've been involved in the 3rd legacy of service, right? Because that one spiritual truth I found out is that in order to get out of the darkness of your life, you have to serve others. I didn't know that. I made everything about me. But it just seemed like it was a lot of ease and comfort when I helped you. And that's how my sobriety started. I got back with that wife. I got a real job. I mean, everything came back to me amazingly fast, right? Physically, I mean, I got a job. I mean, I got a good job, really, a union job, right? And I had money in the bank. I got a car. We had those 2 little AA babies. I mean, life looked, from the outside looking in, looked great. But to the untrained eye, it looks like normal living is a solution to alcoholism. But see, here I am in a meeting with a rope. I'm just looking for a bridge to jump off. Because at 5 years without a drink, I'm dying in the rooms. I'm dying of something I don't understand about. I'm dying of something that we're not even talking about. I'm dying of untreated alcoholism. You see, I'm under the delusion that abstinence is the solution to a spiritual malady. And see, I don't understand that. Right? I'm still that same guy that's walking around with a belly full of fear, a belly full of insecurity, a belly full of secrets, God forbid. And I'm not telling my sponsor any of this because I don't talk about this stuff. I don't know how to talk about this stuff. So I internalize everything without a drink. If you came up to me in a meeting and say, hey, Jim, how you doing? Like the veins would be popping out of my neck. Hey, everything's great. Everything's fine. But what happens to me is I give this talk and, at the end of this talk, there's the line, everyone thanks your hand. And this guy came up to me and I'm 6'4". He's 6'4". He looks at me and says, you're screwed. You're screwed. But a little bit saltier language. And I want to start a fight in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because I don't know how to face resistance with no resistance. I don't even know how to face confrontation without violence. I'm just a violent guy and nothing has changed in my life other than I'm not drinking. But I take a step back and I look at this guy in his face and I said, you're right. I need help. And I find myself in a little apartment on the Hudson River, looking over to New York, and I'm getting a spiritual test from this guy. First question he asked me, Jim, how long can you hold your breath? How long can you hold your breath? How long can you be in a 12-step program and not work the 12 steps? What does your relationship with God look like? Well, I'm Catholic. I guess I believe in God, but what does God have to do with any of this stuff? What makes you alcoholic? The best I could stammer out of my mouth in that moment was I drink too much. At that time, I had no idea about the physical allergy. I had no idea about the obsession of mind. I had no idea about the search engine, the spirituality deep down inside every one of us. I didn't know that drives everything, right? I didn't know any of this stuff. Then he asked me a question that, some people have a hard time believing, but this is the way it was in my neighborhood. He looked at me and said, "Where's your big book?" And I looked at him and said, "I don't have a big book." No, I didn't even say that. What am I saying? I said, "What's a big book?" And I'm sure there was a big book on a podium at a literature table at meetings. We were never encouraged to open that book up. So I never had a big book, right? And then he asked me a question. Well, it wasn't really a question, it was a consideration. If AA works, why do you have so many problems? Because the truth of the matter is, I'm not working AA. I'm not drinking. I'm going to meetings, which is very important, a very important suggestion. But I'm not living in a program of recovery that's going to take away these emotional feelings that I have, or the causes and conditions of the things that I suffer from. I got a boatload of stuff, and I don't know how to talk about this stuff. But what happened on this day, this guy, Bill Grace, he came from St. Paul, Minnesota, a man that was armed with the facts about himself, man of depth and weight. Comes from the same place that my sponsor comes from today, ironically, right? And starts to paint the picture. Talks about the two goals of AA, in his opinion, two goals that I truly believe in today. First goal, don't pick up the first drink. That's the obvious one. But it's the second goal we all want to attain, and that's to step into the sunlight of the spirit. Because that's the place where we're going to experience real freedom from the bondage of self. That's where the walls start to come down and we start to have a relationship with other people. See, the old timers used to say this all the time, that alcoholism is nothing more than a soul sickness caused by a separation from God and a disconnect from each other. I've been walking around with walls built around me for years. You're not coming in and I'm not coming out. I'll only tell you so much. I'm not going to share anything of deep emotional value. No, we don't do things like that, right? There's a price to be paid to get into the sunlight of the spirit. It means that I need to walk into the darkness of my life, and I got to start to uncover, discover, and discard the things that are blocking me. Daily Reflections was read this morning. There's a line in Daily Reflections, or in one of the paragraphs on May 1st, if you ever read it, it says this: "It's a side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my mind and my body, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light, and walk into fear to find peace." See, living in the darkness sparks at investigation. But in order to get free, I have to walk into the darkness. And see, what the old timers used to say, things like this, that alcoholism or AA is like a big bonfire, right? A lot of people are walking around the fire, but eventually the fire is going to go out. But if you really want to change, if you really want to have a relationship, if you really want to bring down the walls of indifference, you have to walk through the fire and get your ass burned and feel the uncomfortability of change. And see, there's only one requirement for that. I got to be willing. And see, there's one thing that I can't do for anyone here, and none of you guys can do for me, and that's to give me willingness. Willingness is an inside job. And what makes us willing? Well, our good friend Ralph likes to say, a good whooped ass will make you willing, but circumstances make us willing. Being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Being sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and still having a lot of troubles. That doesn't mean we're trouble free. It just means that where I'm being weighed down like an anchor. Ball and chain around my shoulder. Why is everything happening to me? Making everything about me. Not being able to live in that place of emotional sobriety or emotional maturity or any kind of balance. That my life is like a teeter board. Depending upon what's going on, that's how I'm going to react. I don't know that I can get free from that stuff. And so I start to walk into the sunlight of the spirit, and into the darkness of my life. And I start to look at some things. Downstairs at my kitchen table, well, it's not sunny out now, but on a lot of days when I sit with someone, I kind of paint that picture. We sit at my table. There's a long hallway to the glass door at the front of my house. And I tell them that's really the goal, is to step out that glass door into the sunlight, right? But in order to step out in that sunlight, you've got to walk through this hallway. And you got to start moving things. You got to start looking at things that you've never looked at. You got to do something which I thought was a weakness, but is really strength in disguise. I had to become vulnerable to another man. You see, I have a lot of pride, like a lot of us. I don't want to tell people how I feel. I don't want to talk about what's going on in my life. I want to just bury everything and make believe that everything is fine. But that's not serenity. That's not sobriety. That's not Alcoholics Anonymous. Because if anything has really showed up in the last 36 years of my sobriety, is that we need each other. And we need to get to a place where we could have sometimes uncomfortable conversations about what's going on in our lives. So I learned about this first step. I started to read about the doctor's opinion. He took me through the doctor's opinion. Silkworth lives right by me. I shouldn't say lives by me. I guess he does live by me. His gravesite is right by my house. We had a big book retreat last weekend or 2 weeks ago, and a bunch of us all went to the gravesite to do a little Dr. Silkworth memorial to thank him for the life we've been given. Because without him validating Bill's white light experience, who knows if we would even be here right now. But how many times do I pass the Glenwood Cemetery and I look in, there's two of you girls sitting in there on a beach chair, two guys sitting on there with folding chairs, and one's reading to the other. And I know what you're reading. You're reading the doctor's opinion, finding out what we really suffer from, this hopeless condition of mind and body that we can recover from. Who knew you could do that? Right? So as I sit there and I start to understand that powerlessness that I suffer from, no wonder why I can't stop drinking. I got a mind that can't stop, and I got a body that just wants to keep going. Right? Nowhere in our literature does it say anything about AA getting us to quit drinking. It says quite the opposite if you read our literature. It says we're powerless. Lack of power is my dilemma. I have no mental defense against the first drink. You see, what I believe that AA's design is to wake us up to the great reality. And whatever your higher power is, you need to have a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, personality change, psychic change, interchangeable words, whatever you need in order to recover. And see, the wake-up call is bringing me into step 2 and bringing me into the chapter We Agnostics, and to start examining a lot of the old ideas that I've been walking around with. Just, I come from that 60s Catholicism of God's a punishing God and God's going to send me straight to hell for everything I've done. I had to learn to let go of a lot of old ideas about a lot of things. And see, the guiding force of my life, these ideas, these emotions and attitudes, Carl Jung talked about that with Roland Hazard, right? They have to be replaced. In that little story, Hazard talks about, having a new simple attitude. And what's that simple attitude? If I can set aside my old ideas, if I can get honest with myself, if I could search diligently, the promise is I could find God. And that's what Bill Grace was sitting with me and telling me, that if I go into the darkness and let go of a lot of old ideas, start to examine the things in my life, get down to causes and conditions, get down to all these resentments, get down to the 100 forms of fear, get down to all the unhealthy dependencies that you put on others to make you feel good, your unreal expectations. I had to look at the trauma of living on the streets for 2 years. It almost killed me. It changed me as a human being. It's a miracle that I'm even able to talk about that stuff now, because it was so traumatic to me. And the harms I've caused others, and get it all on paper. Get down to the common manifestations of living a life on self-will. And when I was able to do that, I was ready to do a 5th step. And my original 5th step was the most powerful day of my life, other than my 2 children being born. Because I was in for a long talk, and I was also true. And also one thing I was very definitely, one thing I truly understood, that I would never walk through that glass door downstairs if I had a secret in my back pocket. So I knew that I had to put it on the table. And on this particular day, it was a long talk. I told this man everything. I didn't hold back anything. And like the book instructs, take that hour, take the book off your shelf if you want. I didn't do that. I went to a place called Liberty State Park, which is right on the Hudson River. And I walked out on a pier, and I read those 5 first proposals, asked myself the question, are all the stones properly in place? And then I looked to my right. Less than a quarter mile to my right was the Statue of Liberty. Looked across the Hudson River. Right in front of me was the World Trade Center. Looked to my left, maybe a half a mile, was Ellis Island. Symbols of freedom. And here I sat as a 32-year-old man with tears coming down my eyes, with the arms of God wrapped around me. And I understood that for the first time in my life, that, you know what, I'm free. I'm free. There's a big trap here. Probably the biggest trap in Alcoholics Anonymous. So after I did that fifth step, I fell prey to comfortability. Everything's good. Back with the wife, back with the kids, everything's good. Good, right? Getting overtime, coaching baseball, coaching basketball, involved with my kids' lives. Nothing wrong with that. But what happened is that started to overtake my primary purpose, right? And little by little, I didn't know that I started to drift. Don't let the life that AA gave you take you away from your AA life. We hear that 1,000,001 times. And all the good things, I started to hang myself with my blessings. The ocean's right here. Take the boat on the ocean, pointed east. I can see the horizon. I can see the sunrise every day. It looks like a beautiful picture, but what I don't recognize is that I'm drifting from town to town to town. And that's what happens for many of us in recovery. Life is good. Everything's in place. But I start to balk on some things. And I start to rest on my laurels. And all of a sudden, I'm 10 years sober. And I walk out of a marriage because I found the woman who understands in AA. I'm the guy that builds a beautiful spiritual structure up for myself, and I tear it down with a senseless series of sprees. And let me tell you, you don't need to be drinking to blow your life up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Just sponsor a bunch of guys, or girls. You'll find that out. And I blow up my life in 10 years without a drink, I'm behind that 8 ball again. Dishonesty, lying, giving my sponsor 30% of what's really going on. Living that double life that the fifth step even talks about, right? By the time I'm 13 years sober, I walk in a bar because I'm fed up. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I walk in a bar, and again, I don't want to drink, but just like Dr. Bob, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I don't want to drink, but God damn it, I got to get the pain to stop, so I'm going to take a drink. And I order a drink at the bar, and I'm staring there, and the angels pop up, the angel and the devil, drink it, don't drink it, drink. Almost like a blackout. I don't even know. All of a sudden, a hand goes around that glass and pulls it back. And when I look up, the bartender just happens to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he says to me, "What the hell are you doing?" Basically throwing my life away. I took my tail, I put it between my legs, and I walked out of the bar. And 2 weeks later, I'm in a meeting where I met this guy called Peter M. Many of you know him. And for the sake of the time and the story, my life was recreated through his help and through looking at a lot of things in my life. I had to get down to causes and conditions. I had to look at a lot of the old ideas that drove me. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes are one of the most important things we need to examine in our recovery. And why I say that is because, I think my life should look a certain way sometimes. I think my life should look a certain way when it comes to my family, or to my relationship, or to my job, or to my money, or even Alcoholics Anonymous. And the minute that it doesn't look the way I think it should look, that's where the conflict and that's where the noise starts to go on in my head. And that's where I start to separate from God, and all of a sudden, my life is all about Jimmy. And the question is, when I start to examine that stuff and I see the truth about it, am I willing to live on terms other than my own? Am I willing to live life on God's terms, or am I back to living life on Jimmy's terms? And that's a really hard thing to see sometimes, especially when you live in the delusion that going to meetings, I'm sponsoring guys, speaking here and there, doing service work. It's a real fine line of dishonesty with myself. And if I don't see that, I fall for that trap. And, so my life got better, little by little, my life just got better. I went through a divorce. I like to say, there's not a person on this call right now who hasn't had some sort of adversity in their life. And whether it's a family issue, whether it's a health issue, whether it's a financial issue or job related issue or whatever issue, we've all had our turn in the barrel, right? But what I've learned here is that the evidence is all around me of men and women who have gotten through their problems with a simple reliance upon God, practicing these principles in all our affairs, having a network of men and women that I can go to and talk about what's really going on, and not to internalize this stuff and think that I'm so unique now that I'm 36 years sober. I don't need to tell you guys this has been a little rough go for the last 2 months. That's alcoholism protecting itself, right? Again, Alcoholism doesn't come in a bottle, it comes in my mind. My mind has to the ego is a powerful thing. I love what Bill writes in How It Works. At some of these we booked, we thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness, out of commands, we beg you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go. Absolutely. Why can't I let go of things in my life sometimes? Why do I resist change, even though it's so goddamn painful? Found out it comes down to one word for me, called pride. And my pride is the essence of my self-centeredness. And my pride leads to procession to all my character defects. And pride and ego will always step into place when I'm in spiritual stagnation. So just stop praying for a while. Stop meditating for a while. Stop sponsoring for a while. Stop doing what we do in here. And it's a real slippery slope. And it was a real slippery slope for me. But I started to get, back in order. My life started to get back in order again. I went through that divorce, the the problems of life. In 1999, I was in a huge accident, which I'm still paying for. I've had over 40 surgeries in the last 20-something years. I always like to kid around and say I'm 5'8", but with all the metal in me, I'm 6'4". It's a miracle how that happened. But the truth of it is, I've had my turn in the barrel, like all of us. And I've walked through that, and I haven't gotten loaded over that. Gone through a divorce like some of us have. 2 years ago, my mom, she passed away. That's a real strange thing. My mom was like a workout freak, and at 90 years old, the doctor came to her and said she needs a knee replacement. We're like 90 years old, and she goes, she's in better shape than all of you. And my mom got a knee replacement, and when you put someone at that age under anesthesia, it kicked in her dementia. And we became the parent. I became the parent of my parent. I mean, how crazy is that, right? And my mom just slipped away to the point where me and my wife, Mary Beth, couldn't take care of her, and we had to put her in assisted living. And then COVID hit, and 43 people in the facility got COVID and died. And my mom was one of them, and dealing with that, thank God for the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God I listened to your stories. Thank God, I don't make things about me, and I try to be of service to everyone. But you know what? I walked into that day that I'll never forget this day till the day I die. I 2 minutes. That's what I got. 2 minutes, Glenn. I got you. And I sat with my mother, and held her hand and talked to her and all that stuff. And she looked like a skeleton. And just, thank God I've heard the evidence around me of you guys walking through that stuff. And how do you walk through this stuff without, just, I don't know, without just going crazy, right? God takes one life away. And then my daughter came to us, and she said, "Hey, we're pregnant." So we have our first granddaughter now. She's 9 months old. What a bundle of joy that is. I mean, that's a trip. All you grandparents, you all said, wait till you see what happens. Well, I'm seeing it, and I love it. So it's thank God for that. But this whole deal, man, living life on life's terms and living life on God's terms, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's tough. But, we get to do this one day at a time. And I'll end on this. The old timers used to make a lot of promises. One of the big promises was, if you come all the way in and sit all the way down, you're going to have lifelong relationships and lifelong friendships. And how true that is. There's so many people, Glenn knows this. When you go around the country, there's so many people that you become friends with. They're just solid members of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the one thing they did promise me was when I had 90 days. And in New Jersey, the way we celebrate 90 days is there used to be a 90-day pin. It was a triangle with a G on the top, AA on the bottom, and a dot in the middle. And what would happen on day 90 is you go to the podium, you had a jacket and tie, because that's the way we were. AA etiquette still exists, believe me. You'd go to the podium, and your sponsor would point to that little insignificant dot and say, "Hey, that's you," right? But he made this promise, and I make this promise if you're here today new or suffering or double-digit sobriety, going through the ringer, What the promise was this: if you could put one hand in G, God, and one hand in AA, and live in the 3 legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll never have a hand to pick up a drink. And how true that's been. I've been through the ringer. I've had great times, good times, hard times. It's called life. It's called life. And because of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and friends like you guys, we live this deal one day at a time. And that's all I have. So thanks a lot. Thank you, Glenn.